Hey friends, welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I am the Forest. Thank you for joining us this week. I have a conversation with Lorraine Weiss. Lorraine has been on the podcast before. She is a deep soul, a deep well of knowledge. I always love talking to her, and you also might know her as a musician who's played on things like the Ram Dass record. She played at our live show, sat in Santa Fe. She plays the saxophone, does a lot of sound healing, does medicine work, has been doing internal spiritual work for many, many decades. And so it's like great to talk to her because we can tap into all of that experience and knowledge and listen to the crossover, and there's always stuff to learn, and it's just the sweetest thing in the world. So you're going to enjoy this as always. This is a great one. A few quick announcements. We added a few live dates, including some in Europe. First up is going to be the Bottle Rock Festival, Napa Valley, California. Can't wait for that. That's May 26th through 28th. They've got Post Malone and Lizzo, Duran Duran, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Little Nas X. It goes on and on. The National, Wu-Tang. I will be playing there as well. I will be, I think, on the Alliance stage, if I'm correct. And I'll be playing earlier in the day, so get there early to catch my set, but that'll be fun. That's May 26th through 28th. And then we'll be back in Ireland for the Beyond the Pale Festival, June 16th through 18th. Looking forward to that, and hopefully cross paths with my dear friend John Hopkins, Max Cooper, both been on the show here. And then Dreamers Land is in Poland in August, and we will be announcing a couple other dates in August in Europe. But right now we just announced London. So I know that I wasn't able to come last November, but I'm coming. August 13th is the plan in London, England, and that's going to be a joint show with Peter Broderick. We're planning to do a collaborative show in support of Burren, where we just improvise and do some of our classics at the same time. I've never done anything like that, but I'm so looking forward to it. It's going to be magical. So that's August 13th. And then the Ram Dass Summer Retreat is August 24th through 28th. And of course, we'll be at Esalen around 4th of July weekend. That's sold out, but we're going to come back in December. So go over to eastforest.org, check out the tour dates, and sign up for the newsletter if you want to know when tickets and retreats and stuff happen. And we will let you know right away. You can also always follow us on social media and all that kind of jazz. And for our new listeners, if you are new, welcome. And I encourage you to go back into the back catalog of this podcast. We are over 250 plus episodes at this point, and everything is evergreen. So there's such amazing individuals and conversations that have gone on for the last, 5 years or more. We've been doing this weekly show. So everyone, I encourage you to go back. Sometimes we highlight some of that back catalog with the quote best of releases, and it's not that there's one's better than another. It's just like memories from the past. You can do that at any time and always dive back in. And this Friday, May 5th, I'm excited that I am releasing a new song with our dear friend Anna. And Anna's got it's her first solo album that she's released in her career. It's coming out of Mercury KX, and there's a collaborative track that we worked on together, and I think it's the last song on her album. It's coming out this Friday, the single. It's really good. It's a really jammy, groovy, like spring into summertime vibes. I can't wait for you to hear it, and I'm looking forward to hopefully bringing Anne on the show to tell you more about her wild world and her artistry. So new music coming this Friday. And of course, thank you to all of our friends on Patreon. That's patreon.com/eastforest. That is the council. The East Forest Council there's lots of ways to get engaged, but it's just a great way to support this podcast and the project in general. In any way, like if you don't even care about like what the rewards might be, if you want to support, check it out. It might be a good doorway in. But I get to share live recordings there, like some stuff I just did at Treefort or demos. And sometimes we do other fun things. Of course, we do our monthly Zoom council. And that's coming up tonight as I record this. But that's patreon.com/eastforest. All right. Well, thank you all for listening. And I hope you're having a good spring as things are springing forth in these crazy, turbulent evolving, blossoming times. But let's get into this wonderful conversation with our old friend, Lorraine Weiss. Lorraine Weiss, thank you so much for connecting. Good to see you.
Krishna, great to see you.
Yeah. Last time I saw you was in your neck of the woods when we were on tour in Santa Fe and had the wonderful pleasure of having you grace us on stage. And we got to do a little music during the ceremony concert. That was awesome. I don't get to do that much. That was awesome.
Oh, I was blown away by how great it was. So it was amazing for me. And you and I have a jam that happens that I really, really love.
Yeah.
It's effortless.
If people haven't heard, you've been on the podcast before, and I love our last episode we did. It's probably several years back. Actually,
many years back.
Yeah, now that I think about it, that was a while ago. Because I don't want to repeat that whole story. I actually highly recommend people go listen to that episode. But the short of the long is, you were in southern Utah by a whole twist of fate, and then we did some recording that we ended up using in the Ram Dass album, and you play the soprano saxophone on the songs Love Everyone. Is it Love Everyone or Love Everybody? I forget now. It's Love Everyone, I think.
Love Everybody.
Love Everybody. I don't
know. Yeah.
And also the song called A Miracle. And then I ended up also sampling that last podcast and using it on the record Possible, the song Tabula Rasa. So people might put the pieces together here. Yeah. And then we did some music live on the tour, which was a blast. And the last thing I'll add, just for the deep fans' background here, soon there'll be an episode with Ivy Ross and Susan Magsamen, who wrote this amazing book about the brain and art. And I met you through Ivy. So that's just more connections.
Yeah. Well, and the amazing thing for me, I don't think we talked about this last time, was I didn't really know what the project was when I was going to Utah. And
really?
No, you kind of wasn't quite out in the open yet, I don't think.
Okay.
And Ram Dass has always been, I think one of the most incredible, influential, best teachers of our times. And I have a lot of very weird synchronistic connections to him too. And then when I got to Utah and found out it was the Ram Dass project, it was like, that was just another miraculous thing.
Yeah. How did I drag you out there without explaining that it was, I don't know. I don't remember. It was probably 2018, 2019 when we did that.
But try 2019. I think we jammed on the toy Casio. You played the little...
At your place, yeah. Yeah, so I guess I should say I was out there staying at, you live at Ivy's house outside Santa Fe, and I was coming out there to stay in the guest house when we met, and she has this other building that is filled with sound healing paraphernalia and of all kinds, amazing stuff. And so we went out there to play some music, and we saw our mutual love for the ability of sound and music to crack you open.
And one of the wonderful things about Ivy Ross is that she's like a magical connector of people. And so if she tells me there's somebody I need to meet, I will go far to meet that person.
We only had to go about 10 feet out your front door.
And here's this little toy piano, and said, let's jam. And it was so instant and so profound. I don't get to connect that deeply with people musically that often out here. So if you would have invited me to the North Pole, I probably would have gone. Found a way to go
sweet.
there.
Didn't you say, are you still playing music for the horses? Because last time I saw you said you were doing that at sunrise or sunset.
COVID for me was such a huge reset when things locked down, because I'd been working nonstop, seeing people out here for the journeys for years and years and years. And I knew I was working too much, but it's hard to say no to people that you're going to make a difference with, or this work makes a difference with. And So when COVID happened, I was booked out like 3 months in advance. And, the lockdown had to just stop everything, which for me was really a blessing because I knew I was working too much. And I started, first off, I realized how really lucky I was to live in a place in nature. And no matter what was happening in the world and how traumatic it was when it first happened, I just had this knowing I needed to be out at the sunset
Yeah.
and I needed to be grateful every day. So I started going out at sunset and playing the sax, just getting myself into this state of gratitude and intention not to let a single sunset ever go by where I didn't get into that state in some way. So I just
Hmm.
started playing and, I figured I'm just playing for myself and to be in that space. And it's pretty, how remote it is out here. Neighbors are pretty far away. And I started getting emails from my neighbors going, "Oh, thank you for playing. It really calms us down." And the neighbor closest behind us wrote and said, there's a big fence, so I can't really see anything. He said, "I just want you to know that as soon as you start playing, my horses come up to the fence and prick their ears up and listen the whole time you play." I thought, oh my God, that's the coolest audience I've ever had. And
Yes.
I could hear, then I could hear them. I could hear certain songs they liked more, others they didn't. Um, and I just felt this need to play for the horses every night. And the first year, I don't think I even missed a night, no matter how cold it was. And it's become one of my main practices, not only bringing me into a state of gratitude, but kind of, some nights neighbors will call and go, "Oh, that was so beautiful." Sometimes for weeks, nobody will call. Sometimes it's freezing. But it's kind of like whatever you put out into the world, it's received in some way. You're offering whatever that was. And even though I'm doing it for myself, I started calling it first I was calling it the gratitude concerts. Then I started calling it the horse concerts. So it's kind of stayed the horse concerts. And I was out there last night in the freezing cold till my fingers wouldn't work.
Equine.
The
Yes.
equine concerts become
Yeah.
an important practice for me.
Hmm.
Just, the sunset and putting something out there.
Do you think you'd still do it if you had never gotten the feedback that the horse's ears pricked up or that the neighbors were like, "We like this too"? Because, yeah, I had a similar starting point with my own music way back 15 years ago about it was just for me and anything else was just gravy. But in some ways, of course, it feeds itself when other people are like, "Hey, I'm feeding off this too." But it's good that, that original intention is important. Like that's the seed of the
Exactly.
gratitude and the creativity.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I'd still be doing it because, most people now it's freezing. Most people aren't out there. I don't even know if the horses are out there all the time. But it's, you know, I I'm basically selfish. Everything I do is for me in a sense. And if for some reason it touches other people, that's the icing on the cake. I think to do it for that reason almost defeats the purpose of having your own practices. So yeah, I'd be doing it no matter what. Unless people really complained heavily, which so far
Yeah,
that has.
usually when you get those emails, it's like, oh no, I
Well,
can hear the saxophone playing and I
well,
love it.
Gato, do you know who Gato Barbieri is? He was a great sax player in the 70s, 80s. Um, really great sax player. And his neighbors in New York sued him, because he'd
Jeez.
be playing at times when they didn't want to hear music. So,
See, that's New
you know,
York. That's so New York.
it's true, but I respect the silence too. It's like I don't play too long. And if anyone did complain, I would probably change my MO or go to a different part. But, as long as it's okay with the neighbors and the horses, I'll keep playing.
Right on.
Hopefully wherever I am. So,
So tell me a bit about. So we also discovered that we both have this background of exploring music shamanically and music as a way of guiding people through journeys and you've been working in that space off and on for a long time, and to me, like the way I got into that was music. Like it was really just like self-discovery of music itself, and what about it helps and doesn't help. And as you know, 98% of it was just the music, really, besides the vibe, that you're creating
Yeah.
and a few questions. Tell me a bit about that discovery process for you. Like, how did you find yourself on that path, and what role did music play?
Well, again, I got into the journey work for purely selfish reasons.
Hmm.
I wasn't planning on doing it for anybody else. This was 30 years ago.
Mm.
So, it was almost completely unknown, at least ayahuasca, and it was not even close to how it is now. It was like kind of the pioneers were starting out back then. There wasn't a big container for it.
That's right.
And I was a professional musician in LA, and my body, which has been my great gift in having to change my life and stop and start and turn and deconstruct, was falling apart. And I knew I needed to change my life. I didn't want to be in smoky bars anymore. And the ayahuasca journeys presented themselves. And I had no idea what it even was
30 years ago,
30
you
years
you
ago.
found yourself, because can we just start there? Because I discovered it around 15, but that's when it was coming into the sphere of, there was an article in Rolling Stone, but 30 years
Oh, yeah.
ago,
This
it
is
was,
way before
yeah,
that.
how did that even cross paths with you?
Grace, I guess, when I look at it now. But
Sure. Well, it's the ayahuasca, yes.
yeah, I mean, I'm a working musician in LA, everything that entails. And a friend of mine started going away on weekends with her husband and doing something slightly secretive. And I think we talked about this a little bit, and I saw her change. I go, "What are you doing? Whatever it is, it's really cool." She goes, "Well, it's plant medicine." And at that time, I really wasn't into anything like that. I had done LSD in the 60s. I had been around people using way too many drugs and alcohol. And so I was kind of anti
Yeah.
everything substance. And I went, "Oh, well, that's great, but I'm not really interested." And then I kept seeing her change over a period of time. And I finally said, "Yeah, I want to try this, whatever." Because I was at a crossroads with my body. My hip was wearing out. I couldn't really be on stage in the way where I was comfortable. And I went and did my first journey, and it was absolutely exactly what I needed, life altering. It had me face my body and know that I couldn't keep going the way I was going, and that a lot of the ideas that I had around that were pretty rigid, and it just opened everything for me.
Who led that journey? Was it indigenous, or how did that?
No, no, absolutely not. And that's what I really liked about it, in a sense. The person who had it was actually a retreat center, and was very much white Anglo-Saxon spiritual seeker, but it was very Western. And his teacher had been a Peruvian shaman with a PhD in Western psychology. So the whole context,
Wow, wow.
yeah, and even the medicine was different. It wasn't the purging stuff.
Well,
And
what is that? Where'd they get them? Did they make it, or
yeah,
they had to
he
probably at
made
that
it.
point they would have to, though, the actual ayahuasca vine.
Yeah, and so the Peruvian shaman, his family were all, indigenous shaman at some point, but he developed a formula that he had made down there that was in capsules. It was not the usual drink and purge. And we used a combination of psilocybin and other things on various occasions, but the energy of it was definitely the ayahuasca, the mother. And I realized that I wanted to learn everything there was about this. You
Hmm.
know, I'm pretty much, I'm going one direction, then all of a sudden something else presents itself. And
That's what happened to me.
yeah, yeah, I think it
Yeah,
probably happens to a lot of people.
you're
It's
right.
like,
It's so profound. It's like,
yeah,
wait a minute. I
no,
thought I had this figured out. Yeah.
Yeah, no intention, and to this day, I never had an intention to work with people.
Yeah.
I was doing this
Yeah.
for my own healing, my own, awakening, evolution. And I figured I'd go back to being a musician, full on LA musician at some point. But it was so dramatic a change for me that I ended up letting go of my whole life, my rent controlled apartment on the beach in Santa Monica, my musical career, if you want to call it that, where it probably would have started taking off a whole lot more if I would have stayed there. And moving to the retreat center, where for 3 years, that's all I did. All we did. There was a group of about 5 people, and people would come. There were big groups back then for some reason. It was like the first journey I did was a group of probably 30 people. And a lot of what I learned is from what not to do, and what isn't as effective is
Yeah,
like
that's
people,
in some
no
ways what else
integration.
is there to learn, right? It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, a little side note, I just came back from Mexico and I was doing an interview for the documentary we're working on with Xochitl Ashe, who's a Peruvian Mexican psilocybin indigenous. She doesn't like calling herself a shaman, but you get
Yeah.
why can't I speak? She works with psilocybin, and she was saying like in their tradition, you're initiated by the medicine itself. I mean that's the
Absolutely.
primary teacher, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of that learning is through experience. Of course, a lot of that stuff, it's difficult to put into to quantify, to say, well, it's this or it's this particular thing you learned. It's just these energies, but you do learn on a fundamental level what not to do. That's almost very like terrestrial in a sense, and that starts to piece together methods.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, that didn't happen. I was just in the experience for 3 years
Yeah,
where, every weekend we'd do our own journeys. There was like 4 or 5 of us that lived there, or groups would come at least a couple times a week, or I ended up sort of being the shaman's assistant and traveling all over the country doing groups. And still, it was for my own learning. You learn so much being in that space and sitting with people. How in like regular life, how unless you're a therapist or something, when do you really get to be with people at that depth? I was a musician, and in some way, the people that you play with, you play from that depth, but just to sit with people and kind of understand how energy works and how consciousness works. And I mean, that's why when I see all the teachings that happen, there's no substitute for just the time spent in altered states and around altered states. And music is definitely an altered state. So, we have that background. And luckily, the person who was the shaman was really into music and put together pretty amazing playlists for 30 years ago, because there wasn't that much kind of journey music back then, but there was a lot of good music that could be used in the journey space. So that deepened it even more for me, so that when I did start using music myself with people, I had like 40 years of collecting stuff. And what kind of music resonates, what part of the body, what kind of music takes you deeper, what's too expansive, what's too jarring. I never used words in my journey, because I noticed, in the journeys at the retreat center, no matter where I was in my own journey, if words in English came up, I'd
yeah,
go right to it.
different part of your
And
brain. Yeah,
yeah, yes, and it's useful. Like I saw what you were doing with Ramdas in the ceremony space, really beautiful. That
but that's a hybrid too. Like I didn't make the Ram Dass album thinking this would be used in ceremonies. Like when I was playing ceremonies, A, I'm improvising, and B, there's really no words. It's just the music because that makes
yeah,
sense to me. But other people some people use some of those songs like I'm Loving Awareness in Journeys. And I was like, well, more power to you, whatever works for you. But I do want to ask you, though, when or how much have you seen the difference between bringing in live music, whether it's a saxophone or tuning forks or a bowls or shakers or anything, versus recorded music, pre-recorded music?
For me, and when I started doing it, and like I said, I never planned on it. People that knew me from kind of sitting in the ceremonies 30 years ago, back then started to ask me if I'd do journeys. And at first I said, no, that's not what I do. I'm a musician. I'm taking a little break. But, when sort of like my belief is kind of to really look at what's being offered rather than not what I want. And so, enough people kept showing up going, would you do a journey for us? And I had still no intention. And I ended up, one of my friends who stayed in the circle after I left said, well, talk to the Peruvian, and I did. And he said, oh yeah, you should lead journeys. I'll help you. I'll give you, it was like, he gave me his blessing 30 years ago, so to speak. And so all of a sudden I could do that. And, music has been the through line of my life, like I'm sure with you, prior to this, that no matter what you're doing, that's been one of the loves and passions and driving forces in some way. So I had these many, many songs, playlists and stuff that I ended up using. And one of the things that happened to me at the hot springs during the time I was taking all the plant medicine was I put away all my instruments except for soprano sax. And I think we talked about deconstructing last time we talked. And I just went out in these beautiful natural places and felt like I was playing for the earth and kind of letting go of everything I'd studied and learned, just playing long tones and trying to get this like one true resonance where there was no me involved in some way, just tones and sound. And so that's the kind of music I was playing when I left. But I used recorded music because I felt like, there's so much projection that can happen in the journey space. And so one of my intentions and what I had seen happen with too many of the shaman is there's way too much of them in the space, in the sense of there's enough transference and, it's like you're giving people something that's going to change their lives. And for me, I didn't want that much of me in the space. So I never played in the journeys themselves, but I'd play in the integration because that was usually a sound integration. The next morning, we'd go into the sound room and do a kind of a sound session, and then I would play. And that was, such a profound integrative thing. But the whole time, and I kind of, like I said, I stopped during COVID. I haven't started again. And if I do, I may use live music.
Well, it makes sense to me. Look, you do it anyway, whatever works. But I feel like that idea you were talking about of these pure tones and playing maybe to and from the earth, this is to me what's so beautiful in that space is you being a vehicle for what's happening in the moment, and it's being transferred out through sound. Especially what's so cool about an instrument like the sax is that it's a breath instrument. It's just so connected to the body that way. So just literally like your prana is making sound. I used to play soprano sax. I think I told you. And like I regret that I sold it. Yeah. I used to play in
pick it up again.
I know. I want to buy one. I had an alto, and then eventually I bought a soprano. I had a teacher, and I remember in college I was stupid. I was like, oh, I need some money. And I sold my soprano. I think I even sold it for like $400 or something.
Yeah. Well, it's the hardest of the woodwinds to play and play in tune and have a good tone on.
Yeah. I just need to get my armature back, and then I could do. I know the fingering and stuff. I know I could get into it. It's just getting my mouth into it. my lip, really.
getting your head into it. That's
Yeah. But I think it'd be so cool. I mean, that's to me is when anytime I've played in that space, it's of course an ebb and flow and it comes in waves. But when you feel like it's something else playing through you like that, the mushroom or whatever it is playing with you or for you, that's such a cool honor and process that it's awesome.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting to me because the work I'm doing now, I've stopped doing the journeys. Just
Yeah.
it's unknown if I will do it again, but I'm doing a lot of work with sound.
Yeah.
And what I believe is available, especially for people like that have spent time in the journey space, you embody that. That space is something that you can transmit with your being, without anything.
Yeah.
In a sense. And music is such an incredible consciousness altering tool, with or without any kind of medicine.
Right.
And so for me to be able to open that space for people just using sound, maybe people who haven't even done that much consciousness work or spiritual work, that, it's so close and available to anyone. That's what's really interesting to me now, that, I feel like it's kind of, I think you've reminded me of the great Alan Watts quote, when you get the message, hang up the phone. That's kind of where I feel I am these days. And, I think what's interesting to me is being able to help people or facilitate accessing very expanded states of consciousness just by embodying that, whether through music or words or, there's so many modalities you can use, that's what's really, for me, cutting edge in my own practices. It's like,
Yeah, well, you've always been punk rock. You were doing ayahuasca 30 years ago, so now when it gets like publicly traded with companies, you're like, I'm gonna shift gears a little bit. It's like
that's really true for me. Plus 30 years, it's like, that's a long time to be doing any one thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, talk about the through line in life is music, but it's always been consciousness too.
Right.
I was reading spiritual books when I was 14 and 15. I was taking LSD when I was 15. And it was really to find God, or to find that connection, that oneness, that's always been there. And so it's almost like when things become so public and so mainstream, like this is becoming, it's like, okay, consciousness, where's consciousness? There's all the medicine stuff that's happening. But for me, what's the shift in consciousness that is available through kind of not only how much of this is out in the collective, but the evolution of it all. And I see a lot of repeating in the psychedelic stuff, that doesn't interest me.
Yeah, well, tell me more about that. Like, what do you think is being maybe lost, or is the message being lost these days a bit, or diluted, or diluted?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I've been lucky to be around at the beginning of a lot of great movements, because in the 60s, I was like 15 when I took LSD. That was like 1965. And there was really no container for it. There was Timothy Leary saying, tune in, turn on, and drop off, drop out. But there was no big understanding that some of the experiments had been started, but they were pretty clandestine and not open to the public.
Right.
So, we were having these amazing, I took LSD and surfed, we'd be out in nature. It wasn't, in a sense, it wasn't recreational because we all had a great reverence for it. My surf crowd and, a bunch of young kids. But yet there was I don't even think integration was a word back then, or.
Just for the audience, we're not recommending you go swimming and take psychedelics,
no,
but people have done this. But we're not
that.
endorsing any activities that are illegal or dangerous. But that also sounds amazing for you. Surfing and
It was, and I was still the same, angst-ridden teenager that all teenagers are, because, again, there were no guides. There were
Right.
no
It's an
facilities.
amplifier too, in a sense, and you need
Yeah,
someone, like you said, you need elders. You need a ceremony as a kind of container or practice. It whole is a
exactly.
guide. That's a guide in itself.
Exactly. And intention, I mean, our intention was to, expand our consciousness and have a great time, and which happened, and also totally opened doors in consciousness for me, even back then, that are still there. Like the experience of oneness surfing and things that I feel very lucky to have experienced, but it didn't really touch any of my own personal psychological things that probably needed to be healed even back then, or
Yeah.
understandings. And so I see a lot of that now, because a lot of, it's almost like it's heading into the too clinical, which takes out all the amazing opportunities for unexplainable, mystical God experiences. And I
Magic.
say God, yeah, the magic. And I use God in I can use any word there, but it kind of works for me, just because, it's everything, all that is, oneness, consciousness. But you could substitute any word for that. And I think, on the other hand, there's the too indigenous, too shamanic, too ungrounded, where there are these incredibly epic, rock your world kind of experiences that don't really translate into your moment to moment life and touch the, whatever. I think the psychological aspect is really important. Not all of it, but, you've got to do your mommy daddy stuff to some
Yeah,
degree.
it's almost like the psychological is like you've got the 3D here, regular waking life, and then the psychological, and then out further out on the spectrum is like the total cosmic smeared, which is has value, of course. It's almost ununderstandable. Like the journeys, you're like, I couldn't even see if I could remember all that. It's so out there,
Well,
and you just start thinking about for ongoing work, like, what kind of work are we doing?
yeah, and I think, that's a lot what I've seen. I mean, a lot of times when people would come out here, they'd have this beautiful experience, and the question would be, when can I come back?
Yeah.
So you just did enough to work on for the rest of your life, in a sense. And so it's almost like, you know, it's all good. I'm not saying, this shouldn't happen, that shouldn't happen. But most of the time when I hear people talk about the journeys they've had, it's like, well, that's nice, but are you a better father or husband, or, have you made peace with your mother? And so much of the time that doesn't, it pales next to the epicness of things that don't integrate into your daily life in a way that, make you a better human being or make you
Right.
more at peace.
It's like
It's
you said about your original impetus for exploring this at all was your friend. Like, what's working for you? What's going on? That's the old Terrence McKenna thing. It's like you can't argue anyone into any of this stuff. It's like just make if your life is going well, people would be curious, and if you're interested in like that being an advertisement, it's just like, is your shit together, and are things working for you in that way? Like, are you exuding love and things are clicking?
Yeah. I mean, what is your offering moment to moment? Because it's almost like the peak experiences are awesome. They happen, they're grace. But then, when somebody you love dies, or you have a shattering relationship breakup, or, how do you access that place of peace and more of a bigger picture of it all, so that you live from that, rather than just thinking it needs to be good all the time? When people microdose, it's almost like there are times when, things are just challenging, and to just take something to get through that, For me, when I see what's happening, that's one of the things where we think we're entitled to feel good all the time. And I don't know that that's true. You can have a connection to something deep and unchanging. And that's something I believe is there for all of us, with or without plant medicine. And it really is close and a breath away in any moment if you create the practices that have you access that. But then that doesn't mean that you're not going to feel sad or pain or, be unhappy at the state of the world. It just means you have ways to go into something deeper than trying to change it with a external, whether it's Valium or microdosing or anything external.
Do you think the name of the game then is about, I know Ram Dass used the word witnessing a lot, but I'm trying to think of different words to use, even for my own understanding. It's somewhat of accepting, but maybe it's almost like a connective tissue you're keeping more alive and strengthened to the all that is, to the all good. So it's like that is coexisting at all times. If not, I always see it almost like it's holding it all. You might call it love, the great mother, God. It's like you can't be outside of that.
Yeah.
All that other stuff is inside it, and it just is. It's just like you're held in the womb, and that's that. And it's that feeling. It's a feeling thing, certainly more than a thinking thing, at least for me.
Absolutely. And that's what I think the plants have given us, or the medicines have given us, is when you really integrate and really have an intention to stay with the consciousness, it's in your cells. Mm-hmm. So, and consciousness is everything. It's not just the good stuff, it's totality. So when you sit with that, it means you're sitting with, the horror of the world and the unspeakable beauty that's always there too. And you're not trying to just get away from things, which is sometimes one of the ways I think medicines are being overused, the plant medicines.
Getting away.
Microdosing. Yeah. And instead of, I've been in I was in a dance class. I was doing a Zoom great dance class where you just feel great the other day. And afterwards, the teacher comes over and one of the women, people are from, Hawaii and Canada, all over the world in these dance classes. And this one woman said, "Oh, that was so great. I just microdosed and it was awesome." And, for me, it's like there are so many incredibly beautiful things in life, and we're greedy. We want to make them better. We want to have them be all the time. And I mean, that's great if you can do that. But to start to rely on, again, external things to make things even better than they already are, which is amazingly magnificent if you're present to it, that I think that's another way that things are being misused in the psychedelic realms.
What if it's more intentional in the sense that, let's say you are going through something really intense, like the death of a loved one or a divorce, and you're feeling like, I need help. And in the same way, some people might take an antidepressant and hopefully as a bridge to get, I don't know, let's just say they're like, I want to take this for a few months until I can just get a hold of myself. What if it was that way? Or do you think, where's the line for you personally with microdosing? Or do you feel like, look, there's a particular message that can be done here. So it's either like, look, dive in and let's do the work. Let's not dilly around. Beware the underdose, as Mr. McKenna would say.
Well, yeah, and he's also the king of the heroic dose.
I don't like that whole heroic dose thing.
Yeah, so that's part of the culture too. The chattering elves or whatever it was, where
machine elves and
that's
why I'm on a
space.
McKenna bent. Yeah, the culture is not your friend. Culture is not your.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's so much crazy stuff that for me, 30 years and the 60s, looking back even that far, there's so many things that are just irrelevant, that were considered important at the time and even considered important to me at the time. That's why I think, one of the things I'm seeing with even a lot of the really good famous teachers is that, they become their brand and they can't change. So, I don't know what I said on that podcast 4 years ago, but I'm not even sure I would believe it today, you
Well,
know?
when you say that, it gives me chills because I'm like, boy, do I need to pay attention to that.
I
Personally,
think
I
it's a
really
big
do.
deal. I think we all do,
It's a
and
huge
especially
deal.
teachers or, people who have the public ear in some way, and because one of the things, and I'm sure Ram Dass has said it some way, is about examining your thoughts and your beliefs. And, even in the movement, the things like listening to Terence McKenna, that was considered important, the heroic dose. And when I
Mm.
was at the retreat center, it was like, oh, yeah, he can't hold the medicine. It was like taking more. And what I've seen, which is more of a feminine, and I don't think there's enough women leading journeys,
True
but they're
that.
even the ones that are, they're trained by men. You have
Mm.
to go away from it all. You have to step away from it all and then find your own way, I think. And it's by your own exploration, with or without the medicines. But I just lost my
Well, I
train.
love. Well, you're totally right on. A
Oh,
more
the
feminine,
branding, the
but
yeah.
well, that too. But you're right about the more female voices, and it's like, how do you break outside the patriarchy at all? Perhaps the only way is to work with the medicine itself, and try to cultivate the feminine in all of this. Because you're absolutely right.
And the feminine is totally changeable. It can be erratic even, and that's why, I have to constantly go, well, I was teaching that 3 years ago. Do I still believe it today? And sometimes not. Sometimes I see it a little different, or I say, oh, that was a little incomplete understanding that I had at the time.
Hmm.
And, and I think, especially in psychedelics, because people are so suggestible in that field, and some of the things that are being taught, you know, even a couple of years ago may not be as relevant now, you know, and I'm sure it's going to change. Like they're studying, science is even doing, studies on all these things. But it's like with microdosing. And I think it's kind of for me back to that concept of, you can, and I understand, clinical depression or things that are beyond just working with yourself or working with your own consciousness. There are definitely condition and pathologies that where something more is needed. But I think for most people, we're just lazy. We're lazy. We're entitled. We think we get to be happy all the time. And I mean, I think there's an undercurrent of joy that can happen. It's finding that place to rest where no matter what happens in your life, you can be sad, you can be devastated by things that happen, but yet that's available to you. But I also understand there are some people that don't have that. And it may be that that's where, even antidepressants and things can be useful, which
Yeah.
I'm not an advocate of. But what I see now that I'm sort of stepping away from this for a couple of years is that we have it all. We have access, especially those of us that have, explored and experimented in psychedelic realms. We have access to consciousness, to awakening, to kind of the all that is in ways that doesn't require continuing, exploring just to where you're sort of circling around and around and not really knowing that, it's all in you. You have it. It's a breath away. It's the intention to reset in every moment. And that's another way that I see kind of the misuse of everything in our culture.
Or the
You know,
overuse. I love the idea of circling around because it's a great way of thinking about, like, if you're taking that metaphor of being inside the mother, like think of it like a big sphere of all that is. and you're just spinning around in the same place. It's like we all know people who naturally understand this. They've never touched a psychedelic, never will, and there's just a knowing in them. You see it in a lot of motherhood. You see it in all sorts of ways. All sorts of ways. It's sort of the naturalness of what is. There's nothing to do, nowhere to go. It just is. And there's an acceptance of that and a certain knowing that might not even be intellectually understood.
I think most of it is beyond intellectual knowing.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to, like with the psychological stuff, you have to have a little bit of a grasp on what patterns are running your life or what the imprints you've inherited from your ancestors and lineage. But then it's just being with it in that profound way that is the journey space, that is the deepest opportunity of those kind of expanded states, is being able to embody that consciousness in a way that, without ever taking another plant, that it's in your cells. And when people talk about the rewiring, it's in your nervous system in a way that you can access that no matter how wound up and in your head you get. It's remembering that. And for me, integration, which, like I said, wasn't even a word back when I was doing the bulk of my stuff. I mean, it was a word, but, it's almost like my integration, basically the bulk of my exploring was many, many years ago. I haven't done any kind of plant medicine in at least 15 years. And that's been the integration for me, because it's like, okay, what am I left with? And how can I at any moment settle into that space? And music really does it for me. I am that channel, when I play. But just in daily life or talking to people, and a lot of my work now is working with people on the phone. And, or there's now even a word, an integration therapist, which I hadn't heard till recently. But a lot of times I'll get calls from people who want to know if I'll work with their friend who had a bad journey in somebody else's circle. And usually the people who have trouble bringing what they experienced in the journey into their lives are places where there aren't a lot of integration. Maybe there's a closing circle in the morning. So one of the things I've been doing is working with people, integrating big experiences like that. And, it takes a while, even if it's not a challenging thing. Like I said, for me, I'm still integrating my journeys of years ago, and life is an integration in a sense of
being born.
Of being born, yeah. And rather than continuously reaching for the epic experiences, how do you make the mundane? How do you have your daily life come from that space, without needing microdosing and again, I'm not talking about the real therapeutic uses of it, but, the overuse of substances in the culture, in the psychedelic circles. I mean, when I was first journeying, we'd do a journey at least once a month, and then maybe a private journey in between then. And then I'd be sitting in ceremony spaces practically every night of the week, and I realized when I left, everybody back then was so unintegrated into, how does this really work? Or what are the real possibilities of these amazing plants, these offerings, and I think that's what's starting to open up now. And, again, we're back to finding the balance in the too clinical, too shamanic, and much longer periods of integration, I think.
Yeah. It's another Ram Dass quote that's great was like, he was kind of saying like always getting high, you're essentially going away from something that doesn't feel good. And I believe it was his embodied teacher, Emmanuel, who said, if you think of life as a school or a campus, have you ever thought about taking the curriculum It's like you keep running away from the course.
No,
Do what you
and
like, but you could try that too.
I mean, we're spoiled. It's I'm not saying it's better to be, sad than feel good, but there are times when to go into that sadness only brings you a depth of
Mm,
compassion or a depth of understanding, and for yourself too. It's
yes.
like, rather than thinking you need to feel good all the time, that it's okay to be depressed. I mean, if it gets overwhelming or clinical, there's things to do. But I mean, what I see is the opportunity for all the work we've done with plants and people are doing is to be able to create practices for yourself. Like for me, the horse concerts, no matter what kind of a day I've had or what's looming, or, I seem to have a lot of friends that are dying right now.
Mm.
No matter what's occurring, that I can, without anything, find that space where I feel like I'm just a clear channel for source to play through, and connected to that in a way that, you know, everything, I don't want to say it's all good. I mean, it is, but
And
from down here
equanimity.
saying that,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that you're kind of resting in the perfection of life, even with death, dying, terrible things happening, that it has to be okay, even if it's from a perspective that we'll never understand.
That's
You know,
it. That is it. Like resting in the imperfection and perfection, or the perfection
of life, of
of life, of
totality.
all that is. Yeah.
And I think when you try to understand it, like, why does a young person die? Or, even for me, I spent so many years trying to understand why I have a body that's in pain. I will never know. I can make up stories, other people can make up stories, but it's like, okay, this is the curriculum, or this is the what you've been dealt. You do the best you can with that and try to find something bigger to rest in, other than these little identities and little bodies and sets of sadnesses and traumas that we have. And for me, that's the core of all this work. And when people would come out here to journey, the most important part for me was kind of the warm-up work we would do to get to where are you suffering, or where do you feel you're not free, and to be so specific about that in a way that you know you can work with it, with the plants, which are obviously very useful in that, but then to be able to integrate it in a way that it's an ongoing set of practices that you do every day for the rest of your life. They may change, but it's something that brings you back to that without needing anything external.
And not to feel that those practices are necessarily like punitive. Sometimes people think of like, oh, it's these things I have to exercise or whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah.
But when
And
you're saying like when you play the music, it actually feels amazing. Like there's so many ways to go about this. It's essentially forms of creativity, really, if you think about it at its
yeah,
core.
it's almost like forms of letting creation work through you.
Exactly. Better
You
put.
know, whatever, and that's what I've been finding now. Dancing, singing, cooking. Um, it's like, probably when you talk to Ivy, all the research they're doing,
Hmm.
on how beneficial art and poetry
Oh,
and
it's
beauty.
crazy some of the data they shared. I can't. Where that podcast comes out, I actually know because it's when their book comes out, March 21st. So
Very
it's
cool.
coming out soon.
Well, and I think, it's like we've known that all along,
Yeah.
creative people, mystics. It's known. I don't need
Yeah.
scientific data to back up what we've already known to be true, but it's great that it is, because it gives it credibility where, it's like, get your kid off his phone and put him out in nature for an hour. It's the greatest thing you can do. Or, you know, buy art supplies for your kid, or get him a musical instrument, or,
Hmm.
and I think those kind of practices, the integration, like if you never did another journey, you've got music as a practice that takes you there, right? I mean, it does take you to that space. Most people don't have that, and I think anyone can find practices, and it doesn't have to be, serious meditation for an hour. It's like, your life is the meditation. Your life is the art, creativity, letting creation come through you, whether it's cooking, even the most, things that you wouldn't think of as a creative act. It's like I just did my taxes and actually had an okay time with it because I got in that space, and I was so happy that I was doing it and finished them, so it's almost like there's so many structures that when you really examine them or, created, like even meditation, or sometimes it can be such a rigid structure that you feel good if you do what you think you should do. And if you don't, you're hard on yourself, or, I didn't do my half hour of meditation today. Whereas just being in nature can be a meditation.
Yeah, like all these,
Sitting
our
outside.
practices are available at all times, everywhere, in a lot of ways. It's what choice and consciousness you bring to it. That is the act of creation in itself.
Exactly. And I think, it's not about, like, even with art or music, it's not about what you produce. It's that, you yourself, your being is the offering. If you're going to make great music with that's awesome. But you have to get that even that's removed from the sort of what you're bringing to the party, which is yourself as the offering, your being, your consciousness, what you're adding to the collective or the soup or, the pot.
The source code is
Yeah.
you. Oh, I love it, Lorraine. So I have one last question for you, and then unfortunately I have to go. But I want to talk more another time. Let's just keep riffing.
This is so much fun.
Now we can do it.
Yeah.
Here's the question. I'm sure there's plenty of people listening here like, I want to talk to Lorraine, and do you want more work or not? Do you want people to find you because you don't have a website? And I think that's awesome. And so, but if you would like some people, potentially, this is, a small chance to say yes or no.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at what like I said, I do a lot of work on the phone. So if anybody
Yeah.
wants to email me, and other podcasts I've done, usually it's people who, obviously resonate with what we're talking about. So it's not just like random people.
No, of course. Of course.
And so I've been doing work on the phone, and I loved, your ceremony concert opened doors for me in the sense of what can be done with groups. Because the friends I brought to the concert didn't do any plant medicine.
Sure.
And had great experiences. And I ran into some people from, my dance community that were there that weren't on any plant medicine.
Yeah, that's the point.
Yeah. And I think we've opened the doors in ourselves and in all the people that have been doing it all these years, that I'm really interested in finding ways to create, whether it's online or live, or, when I work on the phone with people, it's still working with the same energy. And so, yeah, if people want to find me,
email. That's what you prefer?
Email is good.
All right, we're gonna do it. I'll make it where there's like a space for the @ so spam bots won't grab it, but people can figure out how to make it into your email if they want to reach out to you.
We'll find something to do for sure.
Cool. Oh man, it's great to connect. And like I said, let's do it some more. And I look forward to whenever I can pass through there again. I actually, when I was there, I met up with the 10,000 Wave folks. I don't know if I told you. We've been talking about maybe trying to do something. So I think that would be amazing.
I love that. I really love that. And we can do a concert or something just out here.
Hell yeah.
And have a good time.
The equine, the horses would love it. We'll sell tickets to all the horses in the area.
Well,
they just have to give us a ride.
Horse convention. Yeah. No, I love it. It's always great to talk to you.
You too. Thank you so much. And, till next time.
Till next time.
Thank you, Lorraine. Always so fun to chat. I always love everything we can get into. This song that you're listening to in the background is called Reunited, and it's from the Burn album with Peter Broderick. And we just released an entire 4-hour live ceremony of music, the one we did on the solstice. I remixed it, remastered it, and we recut it. And it's now on YouTube. and it's completely new music. It was all new improvised music designed to guide a ceremony. We did it in my studio, so it's like it sounds great now. It sounds really good. It sounded fine before, but now it sounds fantastic. And John Dahlgren did the shooting. A good friend Max was there doing the switching. So we put a lot of effort into that, and I think it looks great. It's a very intimate portrait into that sort of creation of music, which is just very rare. I think being in the home studio allowed us to just let it be intimate and let it be. It's just unusual to capture that kind of thing on film. So check it out, the Peter Broderick and the East Forest Solstice live stream ceremony is on YouTube. But this song is called "Reunited" from Burren, and I hope you're enjoying that album. But until then, you guys keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit, but if you do, do it with grace.